Today, we will be taking a look at cow's milk, dairy milk versus plant milk. When you put them head to head, which is nutritionally superior, which carries the greater risk, which is your best bang for your health buck? Well, my guest today has spent extensive time researching all different kinds of plant milk and their benefits compared to cow's milk. And today we're going to talk all about that. With that, we welcome dietitian Anna Herby to the exam room for the first time. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Chuck. Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be joining you today.
This is a really interesting paper that you and our colleagues have worked on because you really did take a lot of different kinds of dairy milk and even more kinds of plant milk to get this analysis. How important was it for you to have so much variety when you're looking at all the different stats and nutritional comparisons here?
Yeah, it's pretty important. More so, I think, for the non-dairy milks because there's so many these days. There's almond milk, there's soy milk, there's coconut milk, there's oat milk. So we wanted to make sure to get all of those included. And then with the dairy milks, we just looked at the different kinds of cow's milk. There's also like goat's milk. We didn't really focus much on that, but we did look at full fat versus low fat versus no fat, and just tried to get a comprehensive picture as much as we could.
Yeah, let's run down all the different kinds. So you just talked about the dairy milk. You do have the whole milk, or and so then you've got the reduced, which is 2%, then the low fat, which is the 1%, and then skim milk altogether. But then with plant milk, this is where you guys really shined and hit the store shelves heavy and loaded up those shopping carts. You've got almond milk, both sweetened and unsweetened in there, soy milk, sweetened and unsweetened, and then unsweetened varieties of oat, coconut, oat. I don't know of oat milk just yet. Oat milk, coconut, and rice milk, all unsweetened varieties there. That's a lot of different kinds. Let's start by not bearing the lead and then just straight up. When it comes to getting the biggest bang for your nutritional buck, which is your best option?
So I would probably say that soy milk has the most advantage. We do want to avoid those dairy milks. There's plenty of risks with the dairy milk, including like the hormones in there, the IGF-1, and not to mention just the saturated fat. But when you really want the most bang for your buck with the milk, I think it's soy milk because you do have a comparable amount of protein. Not that you need protein from your milk, there's plenty of other protein sources. But along with the soy protein, you get isoflavones, and those have so many benefits, from reducing breast cancer risk to lowering LDL cholesterol. So I think that that phytonutrient content is the highest than any other milk.
And when you're talking about the cancer risk associated with milk here, dairy milk in particular, what do we know as far as what research has shown as far as a person's risk for developing cancer when they are a heavy consumer of dairy?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of cancer, but the most research that we have is on prostate cancer and dairy milk, and just showing that there's a stepwise relationship. The more milk you're drinking, the higher your risk of prostate cancer. And that's for a few reasons. It's the estrogen, actually, estradiol is in milk products, and that will raise a person's risk of prostate cancer, along with the IGF-1, which is a growth factor that's in milk. And when you drink milk, your body tends to make more IGF-1, whether it's from the protein, the sugar, the just extra calories that you get from milk that then transfers to your liver to make more IGF-1, which then is just a growth hormone telling cancer cells to grow. So we have large-scale studies following a long period of time, large group of men. The Physicians Health Study followed a very large group for a long time, and just those who are eating or drinking, we'll say, more than 2.5 servings of dairy milk a day had a significantly higher risk than people who were drinking less than a half serving of that milk. So prostate cancer, we're pretty sure you should avoid drinking milk if you want to avoid prostate cancer. Then there's evidence also for ovarian cancer, and some mixed results on breast cancer, but the more we learn, I'm really leaning towards you should avoid milk to avoid breast cancer as well.
So when you talk about the kind of mixed results, I mean, let's just put it out there. What's kind of muddying the waters there a little bit?
There's several different factors when it comes to breast cancer. Some of the research we have is it's just following people for say 7 years, which you think that's a long time, but in the terms of cancer development, we really want longer than that. We want long-term studies for say 20 years if we can. And then there's different studies which will compare different amounts of milk drinking. So if you're comparing like a cup a day to 2 cups a day, that's not really a big difference from the low group to the high group. But in the Adventist Health Study, they really checked all those boxes. So they had a large group of women. They followed them for a very long time. And some of those women were just not drinking any milk at all. So we have 0 intake. Some other research studies don't have any participants with 0 intake of milk. So that's why their results are going to be different. But with the Adventist Health Study, comparing the highest intake of milk to absolutely no intake of milk, those with the highest intake had 50% higher risk of breast cancer. So I think that speaks a lot to the risk of consuming milk. And then another factor is that we have dietary guidelines. The government is recommending drinking milk as a healthy thing. So people who want to be healthy, they're exercising, they're taking care of themselves, they're told they should be drinking milk. So those other healthy factors could be confounding the data that we're getting as well.
Speaking of which, if a person is leading an otherwise healthy lifestyle, but they do drink 2, 3, 4 glasses of milk, they're probably eating cheese every day on top of that. Is it possible to out exercise your cancer risk? I mean, can you hop on the treadmill for 2 hours a day and suddenly that risk of prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer comes down?
I don't think so. I think that diet is the most important thing, whether it's for weight loss or cancer reduction, cancer risk reduction. You really want to focus on your diet first. There's not really a way to outrun a bad diet or to exercise it off, because essentially you're still putting these things in your body. Your body still has to deal with the extra hormones, maybe extra pesticides from the milk or the bad diet. And exercise will help. It's better to continue exercising, but the best thing you can do is a healthy diet along with exercise, along with avoiding alcohol. There's so many things we know can reduce risk of cancer. So I'd say diet is number one, and then do as much else as you can with your lifestyle as well.
Talking about exercise, that kind of brings us right, I think, naturally to protein. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. How does the protein in dairy milk, the quality of it, compare to the protein that was found in soy milk?
Yeah, so several differences there. The protein in dairy milk, we've got whey and we've got casein. Casein, interestingly enough, it turns into casomorphine. And the goal of that is to have the baby cow to feel good and to continue drinking. The milk is really made for that baby cow. It's not designed for humans. So those casomorphines affect us, and they're in higher concentrations in cow's milk than even in human breast milk. So we're consuming those, and that really contributes to that addictive quality. But also the casein in there can just kind of turn on cancer cells. It's a part of the risk of drinking milk, versus the soy protein, like we mentioned, the isoflavones associated with the soy protein, they have beneficial effects for reducing cancer risk and lowering LDL cholesterol as well.
What about as far as using that protein to build muscle, which a lot of people who go to the gym swear, like, if you're not getting gobs and gobs and gobs of this protein, there's no way you're going to have any kind of muscles on you. So in terms of just pure muscle building and muscle mass, is it fair to compare the two types of protein? Are they equal in that regard?
I would say they're equal, but it's better to get the plant protein because you're not getting the risks associated with that animal protein. And you can totally build muscle on a plant protein diet, but you don't really need to overdo it with the protein, because muscles, they run off of carbohydrates. That's the main fuel for muscles. So if you're eating too much protein, you're really reducing the amount of those healthy carbohydrates that your muscles need to regenerate, and you get so much glycogen stores. That's what causes your muscles to grow, and that is the storage of carbohydrates. So there's too much emphasis on protein, I think, so we don't need to be worrying too much about it. You can also get plenty of protein from, you don't need that milk, you don't need animal protein at all. You can just eat a balanced diet with vegetables, whole grains, beans are a great source of protein. There's no need to really focus too much on it.
And the other plant milks, we were talking about soy here, but the other ones you looked at, the almond, the oat, the coconut, and the rice milk, how much protein do they tend to contain?
Yeah, so those are pretty low in protein. And so if you're looking for protein in your milk, you would choose soy milk. Like children would probably benefit from soy milk. But as adults, we don't really need to be getting protein from milk. So almond milk, oat milk, these are all great options.
And let's talk about something that really seems to be found in high amounts in dairy milk, but not so much in the plant milks. And that is when you looked at the nutritional analysis that you guys have in your review that was published in the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention, one thing that just jumped off the page at me was iodine. Why is there so much of it in dairy milks, but then just trace amounts, if that, in the plant milks?
Yeah, great question. Iodine is really important, especially for breast health and for thyroid health. And it is found in cow's milk, but it's not that it's naturally occurring in cow's milk. They actually use an iodine-based disinfectant on the cow's teats, and it seeps into the milk. So that's how they're getting iodine in the cow's milk, and that's really not the best place to be getting it. We can get plenty of iodine from eating things like sea vegetables. That's one of the best sources, or even just iodized salt. So those are safer sources of iodine. But that is maybe one of the reasons why we do see some benefit in where the mixed results in the breast cancer research, because of the iodine in the milk. It's good for breast health.
Potassium was another one where there appeared to be some pretty big differences between the plant and or some of the plant milks versus the dairy milks. In particular, there seemed to be quite a bit more potassium in, I believe, the soy and oat milks. Is that just there's more of it naturally in each one of those two compared to the almond and coconut and rice milks?
Yeah, that's right. Potassium is naturally found more in plant foods and not so much in almond and rice. It's just how the nature is. But potassium is great for lowering blood pressure, and it's one of those nutrients that people just tend not to get enough of, especially if you're eating a lot of processed foods. You're going to get more of the sodium rather than the potassium, and those two are needed to balance each other out. So if you're having too much sodium, that's a problem. Also, we just need to be increasing potassium in the diet. But I would really depend more on foods for a source of potassium, like beans and vegetables. That's really the best way to get it.
All right, let's talk about the other two big ones out there when people think about milk. I talked a little bit earlier about the calcium. The calcium that is found in dairy milk that has not been added to it. Like dairy milk is not fortified with calcium as it is with vitamin D. So the calcium that is in dairy milk that is naturally occurring based off of the cow's diet, correct?
Yeah, so the cows are eating grass hopefully all day, every day. There's calcium in that grass, and then they're taking it, storing it in their milk, and that's where we get calcium from the dairy milk. And then on the other hand, a lot of non-dairy milks now are fortified with calcium for that reason, just because they're trying to be comparable to the dairy milk. But research is actually showing that drinking more milk doesn't necessarily lead to strong bones. So the fact that it is a source of calcium doesn't mean that it's protecting your bones. Yes, your bones need calcium, but you also need a lot more than that. You need vitamin K, you need vitamin D. So it's really not what we've been told when we were young, that you have to have milk for strong bones. It turns out that's not actually the case.
Generally speaking, though, when a food is fortified with one nutrient or another, how effective is the body in being able to absorb that, break it down, compared to if it were to be found naturally in whatever it is that we're eating or drinking?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's pretty comparable. There's no reason to avoid fortified foods that have, say, fortified calcium. Um, yeah, or whether you get it from the green leafy vegetables or the beans, or like a fortified glass of almond milk. But we do know there's certain foods that have higher absorption of calcium and even higher than dairy milk. So natural plant foods like beans and green vegetables, especially bok choy, the calcium absorption rate is going to be higher than even drinking a glass of milk. So it's not that drinking a glass of milk you're going to absorb as much calcium as you would from eating those green vegetables.
Bok choy, eh? That's the calcium bomb right there, is bok choy.
It really is, yeah.
Okay. How much bok choy might a person need to eat in order to equal what you might get, say, in an 8 or a 12-ounce glass of milk?
That's a great question. I would have to look up the exact numbers, but a serving of green vegetables, I would say if you can have a cup of those cooked leafy greens, like a cup of cooked bok choy, that would be a great serving to have.
And bok choy, I mean, that's just delicious. I mean, anytime I go out to an Asian restaurant, I tend to order something that's got an abundance of greens in it. Shocker. But bok choy inevitably is among that. And so like that gets me fired up. I'm really excited now about some bok choy, and my prospects have just gone up from making sure that I get some bok choy happening this weekend as well. So thank you very much. What do you
Yeah.
do in the kitchen? I mean, you're a dietitian, so you got to get like all kinds of fired up every time you go into the kitchen. When you pull out something like bok choy, are you thinking more flavor or all of the nutrients that that particular food might have in it?
I really think about both. With my leafy greens, I love to buy them. I'll buy some on the weekend and just chop them right there on the weekend, chop them for the week. And I like the flavor, and I also like just knowing that I'm getting my greens for the day. So what I'll do is just kind of saute it or steam it, steam/saute with a little bit of tamari, and then add onion powder, garlic powder, maybe a little bit of chili if you're into that. And it's just so delicious if you let them steam and kind of simmer in that flavor. So that's what I do with greens. And then of course have some meal with it, like throw in some beans, some rice, and you've got a great complete meal.
Are you like, do you like to go super gourmet in the kitchen, or are you more of a, let's just kind of keep it simple and like really focus on the nutrients, but like there's a lot of flavor also in that simplicity? Where do you fall in that scope?
Totally. I love to keep it simple. If I'm looking at a recipe and it just has like 20, maybe even more ingredients, I just put it back on the shelf because that sounds overwhelming to me. But if you can have something with just a few ingredients and throw it in there, my favorite thing to do is just to add tamari, onion, and garlic powder. You can add that basically to anything and it tastes delicious. So that's my secret strategy.
Yeah, I find that hot sauce does the trick. I mean, like, there's a brand out there
There
that
you
says
go.
that you put that stuff on anything, and sure enough, I mean, short of breakfast cereal, it pretty much does go on just about everything. And I find that with that, you really don't need to have those like 20 to 30 ingredient recipes. I mean, it really, you can just steam a whole bunch of vegetables, put that on top of the beans and rice, like you were just talking about, a couple splashes of hot sauce, and man, you got yourself a little flavorful masterpiece there. I love the
It's so
simplicity of
simple.
everything. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. I think people get overwhelmed by changing their diet because they think it has to be complicated, but it really doesn't.
Amen to that. We could do a whole other show on that. But I want to get back to this milk study because it was so well done and so comprehensive. I want to talk to you about the carbohydrate analysis that you have in here. We were talking about how the body might process fortified foods versus naturally occurring nutrients. But I want to talk about the carbs in particular and the sugar that was found there. How does the body break down the naturally occurring lactose in dairy milk versus the naturally occurring sugars in these plant milks? And then just to throw a third thing on there, the added sugars that were put in the sweetened versions of the plant milks as well. How does the body break all of those down differently?
Yeah, so I think the main difference is that lactose um, has an enzyme, or you have an enzyme, the body does, called lactase. And we also have other enzymes that break down other sugars like sucrase. Um, and those we keep having them as adults. But lactase, which breaks down lactose, it tends to go away. Like it's kind of built into our bodies as something to have as a child because we're breastfeeding and we do break down the lactose in breast milk. But then when you get older, it tends to go away for most people. There are some people with lactase persistence, meaning that the lactase enzyme is still there, especially if you tend to keep drinking milk. If you stop drinking milk, you might tend to lose that ability to digest it. But that's a big problem with milk because people can't digest it, especially African American people or people who are not of European descent. They don't have that enzyme. And so it causes gastrointestinal issues, discomfort. And that's a real problem when we're requiring it in places like schools. They tell you have to have that little carton of milk on your tray. But it really, a lot of people can't digest it versus the added sugars, the other sugars in plant milks, they tend to not cause that problem. There's not really an issue with breaking it down. The body just continues to have that enzyme.
What about for somebody who struggles with insulin resistance, has diabetes? Is dairy a no-no for that individual?
Yeah, so insulin resistance and diabetes, it's really related to fat in the diet, and that prevents the insulin from working, from sending that signal that lets the sugar into the cell. So when you have a combination of fat and sugar in a food, that's like the recipe for diabetes. So if you're doing a lot of dairy, a lot of cheese, especially because there's so much fat in there, that's going to block the insulin from working, along with the extra sugar, which is going to just stay out in your bloodstream because you won't be able to absorb it as well. So the fat, specifically the saturated fat in dairy, is more of a problem for diabetes than the fat that we find in the smaller amounts in soy milk or any kind of non-dairy milk.
Couple more things I want to touch on with you before we wrap things up. And there is a link to the review right now in the episode notes or in the show description. So go ahead and give that a click for a real in-depth analysis on everything. Two more big ones. Number one, specific for women, what do we know about the effects that consuming dairy can have on menopause and menopausal symptoms? And is there anything similar that you guys saw with plant milk consumption on those lines?
Yeah, great question, Chuck. Because in dairy, there's estradiol, which is a form of estrogen, and it's the exact same estrogen that our body makes. And you drink a cup of milk, and it's just absorbed so easily into your bloodstream. And the FDA has said that it's safe to drink this small amount of estrogen, but what we do notice is it affects people's hormones, women's hormones especially, to have that extra estrogen coming in. And they have found that women who drink more milk tend to have higher levels of estrogen. And this can cause problems with, say, menopausal symptoms or breast cancer as well. And then on the flip side, going back 1 second, I'll just say that the reason there's this estrogen in the cow's milk is because they are milked while they're pregnant, because the dairy is trying to get so much milk out of a cow, and that they only have about 4 years where they're producing milk. So they will just re-impregnate that cow, but still be milking it from that previous pregnancy. So all those hormones and fluctuations of pregnancy are in the milk that we're getting. So that then is absorbed as we drink it, and that can really affect women in their menopausal or hormonal symptoms. And then, so on the flip side, we have the soy milk, which kind of does the opposite. So it has a phytoestrogen, and that, unlike estradiol, which is in cow's milk and it's in our body, phytoestrogens, we don't produce those. They only come from plants. Phyto means plants. So what the phytoestrogen does, it looks a little different, but it kind of acts similarly to estrogen. There's two different receptors in our body. There's the alpha and the beta, and these work kind of like a brake pedal and a gas pedal. So the phytoestrogen would step on the brake and kind of slow down that cancer progression, also calm down those menopausal symptoms like hot flashes. They found that phytoestrogen from soy can really help with hot flashes as well. So you get extra benefit. You avoid the cow's milk and that estradiol, plus you get some phytoestrogens if you switch to soy milk.
Right. And I guess that's part of why you went right up top when I asked you which was the best nutrient wise. You said soy milk. So there's another check for that particular box.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Got to also ask you about cholesterol. I mean, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people struggle with high levels of cholesterol. When it comes to that, why was there such a huge difference between the dairy milks and the plant milks in terms of which is best for somebody who's trying to bring down those cholesterol numbers?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the saturated fat because dairy is pretty much the primary source of saturated fat that people are consuming in the United States. So saturated fat, when we drink that, we eat it, it becomes cholesterol eventually in our bodies. And so that is what's going to continue to raise cholesterol. And even low fat milk, say 1% milk, it's still like 21% fat if you look at it by percentage of calories. So people think they're doing a good job in drinking that lower fat milk, but there's still fat in there. So it's best to avoid it altogether. And then back to that soy milk, the isoflavones have just been found to reduce that LDL cholesterol, which is the bad kind. It's more sticky. It causes more problems in your blood vessels. So that soy milk can reduce that number. And I would just also recommend avoiding animal products in general, because anything that comes from an animal is likely to have cholesterol in it because our bodies make cholesterol. If anything comes from a plant, there's no cholesterol in there. It's safe to eat.
And I want to go back really quickly to, you mentioned about bone strength earlier, and that from time to time on the show, we'll get a question from an exam room who say, well, what about studies that show that you need to drink milk in order to have big, strong bones? Kind of goes back to what it was you were saying, and just specific to the fracture risk. Were you able to tease out anything from the data that you observed that shows that somebody who's drinking soy milk as compared to dairy milk was at a higher risk for bone fractures?
We really didn't look too carefully at fractures specifically. We were more looking at the nutrients in the study and just noticing like the overall population trends. Like populations who drink a lot of milk, they still do have that fracture risk. And there's a lot, again, there's so much that goes into bone health beyond just calcium. So I would say that there's so many different factors going into those studies, like if you're exercising, if you're smoking, if you get enough vitamin D, if you get enough vitamin K, all those things are related to bone health.
And last thing, one of the popular criticisms out there when it comes to dairy milk versus plant milk is, people who really enjoy sticking with that classic dairy milk ingredients list. Milk, oat milk, or soy milk, or any kind of other milk, or any kind of other what's on that dairy milk. As somebody who studies nutrition for a living, as somebody who's now done this really thorough, in-depth analysis, what would your retort be to that criticism?
Well, I do understand the concern because as a dietitian, we teach people like definitely read those labels. We don't want a whole long list of ingredients. So they're doing the right thing in looking at those labels. But I would say that on the dairy milk, there's a lot that's not on the label. There's hormones, there's fat, there's just risks in there that they obviously don't put on the label. It's not in the ingredients list, but it's still in there. On the flip side, with some of these non-dairy milks, I do think that there's a lot added, especially if you go to like a coffee shop and you get that oat milk latte. They make oat milk specifically for coffee shops to make it like super frothy. So there's a lot of different stuff added, especially oil. So I do recommend looking for the shortest list of ingredients because they're not going to have no additives, but some of them, like a soy milk, you can find with, like some of them will just have soy and water. But do check out the ingredients list. We don't really see too many risks of like these emulsifiers and thickeners. They're in there and they make it more satisfying for the customer. But as far as I know, there aren't really any risks that have come up from drinking those. Again, people can make their own almond milk. You can make your own soy milk. That's just the best way to do it for sure.
Can we run down an ingredients list really quickly? I just pulled this up. This is one of the more popular national brands of almond milk here. And here's what the ingredients label has on it. You've got filtered water and almonds. I'm assuming both, no problem there. The sweetened variety will have cane sugar in it. Unsweetened will not. And then you get into what I think that a lot of people might start to raise an eyebrow about, or somebody who's not really familiar with plant milks and would just see, oh, milk versus all this other stuff. I'm going to go with cow's milk. Contains 2% or less of vitamin and mineral blend consisting of calcium carbonate. So when you're talking about calcium carbonate, what is that? Should we be concerned?
No, I wouldn't be concerned about that. That's just the way that they fortify calcium in that almond milk to make it a good source of calcium.
Vitamin E acetate, same thing. Should we be concerned there? What is it?
No, that, as far as I know, is just vitamin E, and the acetate makes it stable, so it doesn't go rancid.
And vitamin A palmitate. So vitamin A doesn't seem too nefarious, but the palmitate thing, I'm like, what is palmitate? What what's happening there? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's just a form of vitamin A. It's not anything extra that's added. It's just vitamin A is in there.
Vitamin D2, I guess that's going to be pretty good. Sea
Mhm.
salt. Should you be concerned at all about the sodium levels in the various types of milk?
I don't think so. They don't seem too high. What's more concerning with sodium is going to be processed foods and eating out. That's where you're going to get the majority of sodium that can cause problems.
Gellan gum. So I was thinking gum, that's got to be a thickener. You just seem to not think that these would be a big deal. So gellan gum here in particular, you pretty comfortable with that?
Yeah, I am. Just a thickener. I haven't heard any red flags about that ingredient specifically.
And ascorbic acid. So that's just another name for vitamin C, correct?
Yeah, and that's in there also because it helps with preservation. Vitamin C is an antioxidant.
All right. Now here's the last one. And admittedly, I'm not going to kid you. Even this time, I will be like, what does this actually mean? Because they never quite tell you. Natural flavor. Doesn't say what that natural flavor is, doesn't say what it's made of. It just says natural flavor. Is that really something that we should be concerned about?
Well, I'll be honest that I also don't know exactly what that is. They don't tell us, do they? Um,
No.
I personally am not too concerned about it because most of my foods, I try to make them whole foods, like they don't have that label on there. So the amount of natural flavor that I'm consuming hopefully isn't very much. But yeah, I'm with you. We don't know what it is. The food industry is really kind of playing a trick on us there. That's a good one.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting stuff, but maybe that's a topic for another show. But here's the deal. Outstanding job putting this review together. I mean, really, you looked at so many different kinds of milk. What was it? 7 different kinds of plant milk, as well as 4 different kinds of traditional dairy milk. So just outstanding job head to head. We've got a link to it for you guys to get a closer look right now, if you would like. That's in the show description and in the episode notes. Anna Herby, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Chuck. It's been a pleasure to be here talking with you about dairy. Thank you, Chuck. It's been a pleasure to be here talking with you about dairy.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.